The reason I'm skeptical of things like that, hiring for character, like it feels like a slogan, and I'm not going after you on this because it's become a line. It was a line in Minneapolis about Chief Rondo that he would interview He personally interviewed all the recruits, and it turned out two of those recruits were on that call with George Floyd. Like it apparently did not make much of a difference that Rondo was interviewing all the recruits personally, and he had a lot of slogans about, changing the culture that maybe didn't pan out. Nothing against Rondo.
Well, I mean, that's why I said it's not just that. I think in combination
Right.
with structural reforms, other people in law enforcement I've talked to, have said that there just is not adequate supervision in Minneapolis. That it's basically too large of a department for the level of supervisors that they have, and the attitude of supervisors. Maybe it's because they're in the same union, maybe not. Is just more lax. So I don't think just alone hiring based on the police chief's interview is going to do it.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
So where are you? Where is this hotel?
I'm in Hudson.
Okay.
My youngest son has a hockey tournament in River Falls, and the team is staying here in Hudson. And so I'm going to be doing get out the vote phone calls and watching Pee Wee hockey this weekend.
Okay. We're coming up on the caucus. Lots of phone calls to make.
Yes.
Okay. So this is the Wedge Live podcast. My name is John Edwards, your host, and my guest today is Ryan Winkler, the House Majority Leader, who is also a candidate for Hennepin County Attorney. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, John.
We've never had a majority leader on this neighborhood podcast before.
Well, maybe your standards are going down.
maybe. I mostly pay attention to city politics, so it's I think it's an honor to have you. Thank you for coming on.
Sure, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
You're probably being subjected to lots of requests, and you probably have to say yes to all of them because it's caucus season.
Well, I generally think most requests are good to say yes to, because if I want people to entrust me with their confidence to run Hennepin County Attorney's office, the Hennepin County Attorney's office, I should be able to answer questions and be available.
So what is your diagnosis of the current public safety moment? Violent crime is on the rise. Lots of cops quitting, don't want to do the job anymore. Not just here in Hennepin County and Minneapolis, but across the country. Like, why are we here? What's going on?
Well, I think you have to take a little bit of a step back to understand the moment that we're in. So we had a rise in crime during the 80s and 90s, and it became the kind of thing that people weren't sure how to get a handle on it. The answer on a bipartisan basis was 3 strikes, you're out, stiff penalties, super predators, you name it. And we ended up creating more of a mass incarceration state than we had before. That was heavily racialized. The fear was certainly, at least a dog whistle on racist themes. And we ended up in a situation where crime, for other reasons, began to fall. People started to feel a lot safer, and we started to realize collectively that we had done the wrong thing, gone way too far, and were criminalizing people and incarcerating people in a way that was discriminatory, wasteful, and just generally unjust. So that's why we then saw a shift to a bipartisan set of reforms, moving away from that incarceration model. I think we've been making some solid progress in that regard nationally. I think the fact that the Koch brothers have been involved in trying to decrease sentences, for example, is a sign that there is a significant reform movement underway. And that's been positive. In Minnesota, because we have among the worst disparities based on race in almost every measure, we have that also in policing and in charging and incarceration. And I think that we have been very slow and lax in addressing those disparities. On top of that, Minneapolis Police Department has a bad record on police misconduct and police brutality. And when the murder of George Floyd took place on a video, the stage was really set for a mass reaction against that because it had been sitting there unaddressed for so long. The pandemic happening at the same time, I think, has loosened some of the social bonds that have connected all of us together and made antisocial behavior far more common. Everything from minor crimes to highway behavior that is very dangerous to being anti-vax or not wanting to wear a mask. It's all a product of a broader set of antisocial behaviors that I think are really pandemic related. So to me, it's two things happening at once in this community that may make it more challenging than in others to address the public safety need. And so to me, where we are right now is a need to do a reset on policing, a need to do a reset on our system of prosecution and charging and so forth. And at the same time, a need to make most people feel like they are safe and that our civil authority is ready to address the rise in crime. And it's a moment that really is challenging and demands really strong leadership to pull people together and really both reform the system and continue to make it safer. Because I think those are actually the same thing. I don't think that we can make our communities feel safer if we don't have more trust in law enforcement. And law enforcement, in order to be successful, needs to have the trust of the broader community.
So as potentially the next Hennepin County Attorney, what would you want to do differently than what we have now? What can people expect differently from you than from the status quo?
Sure. We could probably talk for the whole time about that. I think there's short-term and long-term, or near-term and longer-term changes. In the near term, the rise in violent crime and the limited law enforcement resources we have requires us to better coordinate across jurisdictions and bring in other resources to help. So in Minneapolis, the police department is primarily responding to 911 calls and really has limited capacity to perform any kind of investigation work that is required to actually address the carjacking, some of the armed assaults, shootings, and so forth. That requires more investigatory police work and intelligence analysis, which the MPD doesn't really have available. We could bring in federal and state resources, and we could better coordinate across suburban jurisdictions. That requires leadership to make it happen. It requires, in my mind, what should happen is the Hennepin County Attorney, ideally in partnership with maybe the State Department of Public Safety and or the Hennepin County Sheriff and their Ramsey County partners, would assemble a task force to allocate resources as effectively as we can based on what we have in law enforcement. Simultaneously, we need to be doing the same in communities. And because regardless of where crime is happening now, where the concern about violent crime is happening now, we know that communities most adversely affected by crime have experienced that for a long time. And many of them have great organizations ready to go and want to help address the situation. They need more resources, and they're not very well integrated. So to me, it's providing leadership to bring an all hands on deck kind of model. And that kind of collaboration requires a lot of hard work. It requires a lot of diligence. It requires a lot of outreach and engagement. And it's not easy to do, but it is built on trust and relationship building. So that's what I would start with. Longer term, I think that the system needs to continue to be more focused on prevention and early intervention. And that means especially in areas like untreated mental illness, untreated or uh, unaddressed chemical dependency, and trauma in families and communities. Longer term, those are the things that are going to help us prevent crime from happening in the first place. And our systems need to be redesigned to better wrap those services around people at greatest risk. And I think the Hennepin County Attorney should be a leader in helping social services, early childhood education, the K-12 schools, all the public services that we have available should be oriented more around keeping people whole and safe and healthy as a way of deterring crime. And I think we could expect a lot more from our county attorney to advocate for those kinds of policies.
So you talk about bringing in, like, coordinating with the other law enforcement agencies and trying to tackle the crime situation in Minneapolis. Like, isn't the mayor already doing that? I think I've heard the mayor and the chief talk about doing that. Is that really the role for the Hennepin County Attorney to take the lead on?
Well, you focused on city issues, but this is a metro-wide problem. And so that's why I'm looking for leaders who function across jurisdictions to be the ones who bring people together. Theoretically, the mayor of Minneapolis could do that. I'm not sure whether the mayor has the pull with all the suburban communities to be able to do that successfully, or in St. Paul.
Coming out of 21, I'm sure you're familiar with the public safety debate we had in Minneapolis and how that kind of turned into the chief and the mayor and the police against the city council. And I know on your website you've remarked about the defund debate and how you think that was unproductive. But coming into 22, that political battle has kind of shifted towards prosecutors, police blaming prosecutors for what they see as their failures, either not charging at the right level or people are getting out of jail who shouldn't be. I won't say whether I don't know if that's true or not, but police are definitely directing that criticism. And it's being directed at people like Mike Freeman, who's more like traditional old school DFL, and somebody like John Choi, who's seen as more progressive. Like, doesn't matter you're progressive or moderate, you're getting the criticism as a prosecutor. So how do you parse out, like, is that criticism coming from police chiefs in Hennepin and Ramsey County? Like, are those criticisms true, or is that just deflection from the police trying to push the blame on somebody else?
Well, I think I think both of those things are true in part. And I think there's more to the story. So based on my conversations with police chiefs and with people in the county attorney's office, I can tell you that there is a disconnect and a sense of frustration at both levels. So the police chiefs, I think, feel like they don't have a good way to communicate with the county attorney's office today. They don't have a regular feedback loop. So if a chief or a detective is concerned about a charging decision at Hennepin County, there's no front door for them to go in to say, why did you make this decision and what happened here? And the county attorney does send declination letters when they decline to charge a case back to the police departments. But I don't know that there's a lot of meaningful follow through or conversation that takes place. So in the absence of information or better explanation, I think there has developed a narrative about the county attorneys not charging cases within police ranks. And to me, that's a failure of communication and relationship building on the part of the county attorney or the county attorney's office. On the other hand, I think based on everything I have been able to discern, prosecutors are working harder than ever. They've got a bigger caseload and have more charges decisions to make and are making them than they've seen in a long time. And their experience is that the number of cases is very large, and that sometimes they have criticisms of police and the kinds of investigation work that police are putting into their cases, so that sometimes they can't bring those charges. But again, the connection back to explain what the shortcomings are doesn't really exist. And then on top of that, there is a big backlog in the courts because of COVID. People have a right to a speedy trial, and judges are pretty determined to move through those cases. And that, I think, has led to maybe not a policy of not charging certain things or reducing charges, But the practical impact is that just to keep up with the flow, they are making decisions, in some cases, I think, to charge less than they otherwise would. And they don't have the bandwidth to really engage with their counterparts in the police departments to explain what's going on. So I think the system itself is being pretty well overrun right now. And I think with the challenges of doing things remotely, I think we're not structured in the criminal justice system to handle that as well as we otherwise could. And the lack of communication is leading to a lot of misinformation spreading. The last thing I would say is, as challenging as it is for prosecutors right now, public defenders are really at their wits' end. And I think, they've historically had very large caseloads, but the system can't work effectively if a public defender, a judge, and a prosecutor aren't able to dedicate the sufficient time to their cases that they need in order to resolve them properly. The justice system is designed for a certain amount of deliberate slowness of proceeding, checks and balances. And if they're trying to do it all very quickly based on numbers, it's hard for the system to work properly.
So you've talked about legalizing cannabis on your website, mostly as a legislative issue, but thinking about your role as a potential prosecutor, don't you have the discretion to simply not charge drug use cases? Is that something you would consider doing or not doing?
There is definitely a certain amount of prosecutorial discretion about not charging certain kinds of cases. And I would absolutely focus on crimes where there is a victim rather than on simple possession or use kinds of drug cases. So, the county attorney announced a policy of not charging possession cases below a certain number of grams. I think that's generally a fine policy, but the problem with it is that they have not communicated very effectively with police departments to explain how it should be carried out. They've pretty much left it to line attorneys to talk with individual police officers about what the new policy is, rather than writing it down and having a real conversation. So there's a lot of frustration with police departments not knowing what the new rules are, not knowing how to implement them exactly. And I hear examples like, if I pull over a car and there is cannabis in the car, the person has a felony record and they have a weapon in the car, is that a case that the county attorney is going to charge? They just don't know. And so I think to a certain degree, there is discretion. Some of those changes have been made by Freeman by announcing them, but I don't know that the follow-through work and the engagement with law enforcement has effectively made that change. That's one difference I would bring to the table. The other is that I think the county attorney's office could be more involved in expunging past records where people have been, are still experiencing the collateral consequences of past felony convictions for what should be illegal activity, which would be possessing cannabis. And so the county attorney could play an active role in helping to expunge those past records, especially once a person is, has paid a debt that they probably shouldn't have had to incur to begin with. They shouldn't be suffering in their ability to get housing or jobs or professional licenses, and the county attorney could play a role in rectifying some of those harms.
Do you see yourself in the role of a progressive prosecutor like Larry Krasner or John Choi? Like, what do you think about some of these other prosecutors, or do you think they've gone too far?
I think every community is its own separate thing. So, I think that the challenges that we face in Hennepin County are not the same exactly as are faced in Ramsey County. For example, Ramsey County has a whole different structure for how its office works. It has a whole group of attorneys just assigned to make charging decisions, another group of attorneys who are specializing in trial, and still yet another group of attorneys specializing in appeals. At Hennepin, you take one case and you run it all the way through. So the challenges of making sure that prosecutors are empowered to make decisions based on justice in Hennepin are going to look a little bit different than they do in other places. And I don't know that other models are exactly the kind of thing we could import into Hennepin County in order to do the job. I think the culture in the office reflects the the personality of a person who's been there for the last 30 years. I think that there is a need for change and new energy in Hennepin County at the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. And I think a lot of the progressive changes that we want to see happening in Hennepin can be done, and but they're not necessarily going to be based on models from other DAs across the country.
Why would you want to come from the state legislature to be Hennepin County Attorney? Do you not like where you are? Or you're not having fun? Because I'm not sure you're going to have fun as a prosecutor in this moment. As I was talking about 2021, the politics around public safety are very hot. There's a lot of fear and anger, and there's a potential you will be villainized. I wouldn't have thought Mike Freeman would get villainized. He's not exactly one of these progressive prosecutors, but he is kind of being villainized. So you will become a target. Why would you want this job?
First of all, it's really important. I think we haven't seen a moment where the Hennepin County Attorney is so important for the not only the safety and justice in the community, but also for the sense of really being able to get our hands on the level of dissatisfaction and distrust for law enforcement and for the whole public safety and judicial system. And to me, it is a big challenge. It is a very hard thing to take on that requires every bit of leadership skills and acumen in working with diverse groups of people with different interests that I have managed to pick up as a legislator and a legislative leader. All of those skills, to me, are what is needed to be successful as Hennepin County Attorney. And so when I think about the future of this state as a whole, as a state, the future of Minneapolis, the future of the metro area, getting a better public safety system in place that is moving towards greater trust, greater confidence from the public is crucially important. If people don't feel like the justice system is basically fair, if people don't feel like they can trust someone to show up who will help them if something is going wrong, if people don't feel safe, then we are going to further divide as a community, and a lot of the good parts about living in Minnesota will be slowly disappearing. So I think it's a big challenge. I'm just frankly intrigued and interested in seeing if the skill set that I think I bring from the legislature is the kind of thing that can really move this office forward. I think it is, and I'm ready for a new challenge. If you ask personally, I'm ready for a new challenge.
Going back to 21 again, you were against the Minneapolis Public Safety Charter Amendment, right?
Yes, I was against that.
So on your website, you've talked about how it's going to take like 4 or 5 years to hire to the level Mayor Fry wants to hire towards. And the city has been in court and ordered to get up to that minimum by, I think, this summer, which I don't know how they're going to do that, really. It seems like that would be very difficult, and potentially you're hiring cops or you feel pressured to hire cops or train them faster than you feel comfortable doing. So it feels like the spirit of that amendment was to get rid of that minimum and give yourself some space to invest in some of these alternatives, which I think you probably support. And I know it got demonized as this abolish the police kind of thing. I don't think it was meant to make the police go away entirely. It was meant to give the city space to invest, from my perspective, in these alternatives. Can you talk about why you were against the Public Safety Charter Amendment?
Sure. I mean, I think that you pointed out some positive things in it. I don't think, for example, creating a Department of Public Safety versus having the Minneapolis Police Department was a negative. I think it's positive to have and necessary. I don't think there's any choice but to invest in alternatives in public safety to policing, because policing won't, even if you could fully staff, it wouldn't solve the problem, because the causes are deeper than lack of enforcement of laws through a police department. And the idea of looking at crime and looking at public safety from a broad lens, I think, is a good thing. The challenge that I found in the amendment was that there wasn't actually a plan. There was going to be a city council election at the same time that the charter was passing. The city council would be charged with having co-leadership of the police department and the public safety department. New people coming in, no clear expectation or description to the voters of what exactly was going to be done or how. And it felt to me more like a political compromise among advocacy organizations rather than an actual plan for public safety for Minneapolis. I don't live in Minneapolis. I live in Golden Valley. I was asked when I announced my campaign, my position on the issue. I think there's much good in what they were proposing, but I didn't think it was a plan that actually was. It wasn't a plan. It was more of a statement, and I thought that it wasn't going to accomplish a lot. I would also say that I don't think a model of governance in Minneapolis where you had each agency or each department co-led by the council and the mayor functions very well from a leadership standpoint either. People have said the mayor already has total control over the police department. So if it doesn't work, it's already the mayor's fault. Why would you, not want to share with the council? I don't think that necessarily the city leadership function as it has existed in Minneapolis in the past has been all that great either. So I think there was just too many open questions, a lack of plan, and a governance model that I don't think was designed to work very well.
I was watching a CBS News interview with, I think it was like the Newark, New Jersey police chief or public safety director. I forget what his title was exactly. And he was asked about defund, and he's like, I get it. Like, I know what they're asking for. These communities have been disinvested in, and that's what people are asking for. And he made it clear he wasn't taking it personally, and it seemed like that was the right answer to that question, was not to hold up defund as this thing to like punch at the left, but to say, like, I understand what people are asking for. They're asking it for investment in communities. And I don't know, because I saw you talking about it on your website, and like, you're the only candidate I've come across so far who has mentioned it. So I don't know what my question is, but maybe what are you trying to signal by criticizing the defund movement on your website?
I just don't think it's a productive conversation. I think that we should focus on investing in communities, investing in public safety resources that go beyond just law enforcement. That's what we've been doing in the Minnesota House in the last budget, and what we're going to be doing again in this legislative session. We are here to talk about what we're for, and law enforcement will be part of our public safety apparatus. And I think a lot of people want to know, do I think that law enforcement will be part of our public safety system? I think it will. I think we can make it better. I think that the limited number of officers we have and the recruiting pipeline that is essentially dried up creates an opportunity to look at how we recruit, what kind of people we recruit into policing, what kind of standards we have on the front end, and then to create more pipelines in to that profession. I think that conversation, in addition to more funding for community organizations who are trying to intervene early, more resources in neighborhoods that are extremely under-resourced would also help. There is no youth center in North Minneapolis except the Y, and that is really geared for younger kids, and you have to pay to get in. I'm working with a group of Northside advocates on a new center for youth based on what they've actually asked for, what the youth of Minneapolis have asked for. So we can do all of those kinds of things, but we should be talking about what we're for rather than trying to make this about putting the existence of police forces as the main question.
So Hennepin County is a big place. In Minneapolis, there's lots of concern about violent crime and carjackings, shootings, murders. And in, far distant suburbs, it's somebody stole the change from my unlocked car, and people feel violated and scared of that. But it's a big place with a lot of diverse concerns and probably want different approaches from the top prosecutor in the county. Uh, how do you explain uh, your priorities in a place with, how do you navigate differing concerns in a big place like Hennepin County?
Well, first, I think you start with trying to find all the ways that we agree and start on work that we can do to actually address the things that people agree on. This is very high level, but people want to be safe in their communities. They want to be safe in their homes. They want their families to be safe. If something goes wrong, they want to be able to call somebody they trust to come and help. And they want to believe that the court system and the criminal justice system is fair for everybody who's in it. Those are the basic values that I think we pretty much all share. We may have differences of opinion about the best policies to get there or how to build trust in order to deliver those kinds of public services. But I think starting with where we agree is really positive. I think that focusing on safety in the neighborhoods that are experiencing the least amount of safety, the highest levels of crime, makes a lot of sense because if you have lived in neighborhoods in Minneapolis that have high crime and have levels of violence for especially the last 2 years that have been very high, you might be excused for thinking that it's BS that when there's one carjacking in Edina, suddenly everybody's fired up, right? Like that just is not right. And I think that the question is, where do we focus resources to keep people safe? And I think people in Orono would understand if there are neighborhoods in the rest of the county that need more resources and focus and attention to be safe. Because I don't think they will feel neglected out in Orono if we are spending time and money helping youth find better access to resources or opportunities in other parts of the city.
Yeah, it was interesting to watch the local news reaction. A couple of people were victimized in like St. Louis Park and Edina. It's like, well, that stuff was happening every single day, multiple times a day in neighborhoods in Minneapolis, and suddenly it's become big news again because it happened in Edina.
Well, it's pretty widespread in the suburbs. I'm not saying it's the same as every part of Minneapolis, but there is far more carjacking and far more violent crime than people are getting arrested for or makes the news. And when I've talked to thousands of people, and just even within my own circle, there are plenty of people who have either personally experienced violence or have close friends or near neighbors who have, and it's not just in the city. So, it isn't fear mongering to say that violent crime is on the rise and makes people feel very insecure. It's true, and it's not just in the city. And unfortunately, it takes crime happening at 50th in France for people to really get the attention on the news that people in certain neighborhoods have just had to live with, and that's just not right. I mean, we shouldn't be thinking of safety as something that I get, but those people in that part of town don't really. It's something I'm not too concerned about. Like that's not how we should be thinking about this.
Yeah, it's something that DA Bullock on Twitter will often say is that even before the last 2 years, like crime in North Minneapolis with a fully staffed and funded police department, it has been, they've been living with it this whole time. It hasn't just started to happen for them, regardless of police funding and staffing.
Well, that's why just having a full complement of MPD will not solve the problem. Having the ability to do investigations and respond to 911 calls, bringing in other resources like social workers or mental health workers to be a supplement or a replacement for police, or having neighborhood organizations be part of the equation. All of that is necessary, as is making sure that the Minneapolis Police Department is actually properly governed by civil authorities and has the right level of supervision of officers. So all of these things are true at the same time. That if we reduce the debate to police versus no police or more police versus less, we're not really talking about what will keep people safe or make people safe. And I think we do a disservice to the community. People I talk to, they basically say we want effective law enforcement and we want them to respect the community and we want them to listen to us. That seems to me reasonable, and it's also what people in the suburbs generally get.
So it occurs to me I should ask you this question because you're coming to me as the House Majority Leader. Going back to the public safety debate, one of the motivations for that was this idea that we've got the charter as a barrier, we've got the union as a barrier, the state legislature. Like Paul Gazelka is not going to let us do anything. The union's not going to let us do anything. So we have to change the charter. Like, is there any hope of anything coming out of the state legislature absent like a shift towards the Democrats in the Senate? Is that just hopeless? What can we hope for out of the state legislature on police reform issues?
Well, I memean, we did pass a package in August of 2020, and we passed another set of reforms in 2021. The ones that we passed in the summer of 2020 went farther than what we were able to get in 21. And I would say that the window for Republicans to be even entertaining that conversation has certainly closed. In fact, they've now shifted entirely from reacting to the murder of George Floyd and the civil unrest that followed into blaming Democrats for crime being on the rise. And they're going back to their old ways on that. So I don't see Republicans doing much at the legislature on police reform. The thing that there are two things that I think can make a difference, though. One is the Justice Department investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department for a pattern and practice of civil rights violations, likely leading to a consent decree, which can be pretty far-reaching in its scope in terms of reorganization. And that, in a certain way, supersedes any kind of local legal limitations, or it can, depending on how it's structured. So if I were, and I hope to be, a person in law enforcement active in public safety in the city of Minneapolis, I would be looking at the Justice Department investigation and consent decree as an opportunity to make some of the structural changes at MPD that people have wanted to make for a long time and been stymied by. The charter potentially, but also the Police Federation contract. The other thing is, with a third of the officers gone, there is an opportunity to change the culture at MPD by replacing them with officers who reflect the character of the community, people with greater diversity, more social and emotional skills, high character, a servant leader mindset. And that kind of model for recruiting police, which is basically hire for character, train for competence, has been done successfully at the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office. There are a number of police leaders across Minnesota today who follow that model successfully, including Blair Anderson in St. Cloud. And so there is a way to replace some of the missing police officers, not in a hurry, but carefully, which will help also change the culture at MPD, which I think in combination with the Justice Department consent decree could potentially result in the change that people are looking for.
I've heard it said that St. Paul just is better, hires better. Can you explain what that's about? What do people mean when they say St. Paul or Ramsey County hires better cops or has a better hiring process?
I don't really know too much about St. Paul. I know that at the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office under Matt Bostrom, he was the one who really pioneered the concept of hire for character, train for competence, and engaged in a long process with the community and with his own deputies to identify the traits that both were looking for in law enforcement. And as a result of his work, he was able to really drive down the number of complaints about police officers or deputies in his department. So I don't know about St. Paul. It also just could be that there's less of a glare on actions in St. Paul. Certainly, St. Paul has had its police misconduct issues. Suburban police departments have as well. It's not just Minneapolis, although Minneapolis seems to be the most troubled agency in terms of misconduct and brutality.
Yeah. The reason I'm skeptical of things like that, hiring for character, Like it feels like a slogan, and I'm not going after you on this because it's become a line. It was a line in Minneapolis about Chief Rondo that he would interview personally. He personally interviewed all the recruits, and it turned out two of those recruits were on that call with George Floyd. Like it apparently did not make much of a difference that Rondo was interviewing all the recruits personally, and he had a lot of slogans about changing the culture that maybe didn't pan out. Nothing against Rondo.
Well, I mean, there's it's that's why I said it's not just that. I think in combination
Right.
with structural reforms, other people in law enforcement I've talked to, have said that there just is not adequate supervision in Minneapolis. That it's basically too large of a department for the level of supervisors that they have, and the attitude of supervisors. Maybe it's because they're in the same union, maybe not. Is just more lax. So I don't think just alone hiring based on the police chief's interview is going to do it. But I do think if you're talking about a third of the department potentially turning over, that's a pretty large change, and coupled with structural changes in how it's organized could make a difference.
Let's talk about holding police accountable. And so you've said on your website talking about police prosecutions, Kim Potter and Derek Chauvin, that you thought it was a good thing, and I think a lot of people would agree that the Attorney General Keith Ellison took that over. And you said you'd want to make that standard practice to kind of either hand it over to another county attorney or the Attorney General. And so it occurs to me, like, it has worked out in these cases, but what if we have a Republican Attorney General? What if they're like, do I trust the Washington County Attorney's Office to handle this? Would I rather, as a resident of Minneapolis and Hennepin County, the person I elected and trust and maybe shares my values a little better, handle that case? Because I've seen the prosecutor who received the Kim Potter trial say to Fox 9 that he thought that Keith Ellison overcharged that case, and he had some comments about cops get a raw deal in court, like courts are biased against police officers, which seemed to be the opposite of my impression of the truth. So it feels like that could not work out potentially.
Right. I mean, I don't think that there is a simple answer to this. I do think that the conflict issue is real in the sense that if especially in these kinds of cases, if you have a high profile situation in which a police officer is going to be charged for the death of a citizen, that is going to be a high conflict, high tension decision. And it's going to involve, people will second guess that decision a lot. So if you are the Hennepin County Attorney charging a police officer in Hennepin County, people that you work with every day to bring cases into court, people are going to think that there's an inherent conflict. And I don't think that's wrong. I think there is a bit of a conflict in that. At the same time, and that leads to, an assessment or a judgment probably that the decision will be a political decision made by the county attorney himself or herself based on political considerations and not as much based on how the facts fit the law and what can be proven, which is how the case should be decided. So what I have suggested is that there should be some independent body or individual or panel or process that we agree on the front end. So rather than having it be ad hoc where this case comes in, Freeman decides to charge it or not charge it, or to refer it or not to refer it, there should be a process agreed to perhaps by the Metro County attorneys, perhaps a group of attorneys agreed to by the County Attorneys Association, perhaps with the Attorney General's office, where we have a process agreed to on the front end. We vet that process in the community so that we know if people have some confidence in it. And then when a case happens, if there is a killing, we have a process to point to for decision making so that people can have confidence that at least we've all agreed to this on the front end. This is where the decision goes to, and the decision will hopefully be then evaluated primarily based on the merits of the decision. Doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean that the Washington County Attorney in your example got it right. But at least if there's a process that people agree to on the front end, they can have some confidence that it's not just based on the political calculations of the county attorney in which it happened.
So you had a good idea for a police accountability unit, which I've read on your website. Independent police accountability unit staffed with prosecutors whose only responsibility is to proactively investigate and prosecute officers who break the law.
So, I mean, that is an example of an attempt to separate out people who have to work with police officers every day in court from people who might have to make an independent decision about misconduct or the crime committed by a police officer. So that's, what could be done internally. I think for the most high-profile cases, it probably makes sense to do it entirely externally from the county attorney's office.
Okay. I think I've come to the end. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you think is especially important that we should let people know about?
Well, I think we've talked a lot about crime and public safety and prosecution. But there's a lot that the county attorney's office does and can do beyond what we think of in this conversation. For example, we have wage theft that occurs rampantly in our economy. We have laws against it, which are strong, but we have minimal enforcement and limited investigation. I think the county attorney can play a leading role in investigating and prosecuting companies that are not only stealing from workers, but also trafficking workers. There's a tragic case just last week of 4 individuals who died from exposure in Canada, waiting to be brought across into Minnesota to smuggle them in for work purposes. There is an employer at the end of that chain somewhere who is ultimately paying the person bringing them across. That kind of crime should also be investigated, but we don't have much for investigators. Northern Metals falsifies records or has falsified records about what they're putting into the air, and which can be felonies, but we don't have a proper investigatory function at the county level to bring a charge for that kind of crime. And I also think that we can do a better job in Hennepin on crimes related to women, specifically domestic assault, sexual assault, and trafficking of women as sex workers. That kind of violence that is uniquely targeted or particularly targeted to women, I think we could do a much better job of addressing. And so we have these conversations about policing as we should. We have these conversations about crime on the rise as we should. But there's a whole range of justice issues that go beyond that topic that the county attorney can be a leader on. And Hennepin, which is the largest county, the county has enormous resources, should be a leader in addressing those kinds of crimes as well. Because we have a system set up to police for drugs, police for violence, police for street crimes, and auto-related crimes. But we don't have much of a system set up for white-collar crime and for those other kinds of issues that harm people every day. And I think we could do better on that too.
So there's a lot of talk about how the county attorney doesn't have the resources to handle the violent crime. Like, does the office need more resources, or are there resources there that you could use to do these other things like white collar crime and pollution issues, wage theft? Like, do you need more resources? Can it compete with the politics of crime? Because everybody wants you to do something about crime. How do you do these less sexy issues where all the heat is on crime? Like, do you need more resources or do you shift it?
Well, first of all, I think it's likely that the office would need more resources to expand the scope of the work that it does. Recently, the rise in crime and the number of cases they're charging through their adult prosecution division has really burnt people out. I've talked to line prosecutors who've had to go on medical leave because of the stress, and who are leaving the office because of the workload and just the high tension that they're operating under. So they've recently moved some people in on a rotational basis through adult prosecution to help relieve some of that strain. If this continues on, I think they will definitely need more people to do that prosecution work. But there's also a culture issue in the office, which has tended to be quite top down and doesn't really do enough to tap the resources of the line attorneys in the office and get their feedback on what could be done better, how their jobs could be made easier, and how they could be ministers of justice in their cases the way that most of them would like to. So I don't know if we have, I don't know that I can say that we have maximized the potential of the office as it sits right now. And I think probably more resources to expand the scope into those other areas is needed too.
Okay, one last thing. I lied that we were done because we've gone on and on. You mentioned country music on your website. You're a fan of country music. I thought Golden Valley was just across the border from Minneapolis. I'm here in the Wedge neighborhood. How I don't think of you as living in the Deep South there in Golden Valley. What's going on with the country music?
I was born and raised in Bemidji, Minnesota, and that's the music I grew up on, and that's the music that my kids managed to enjoy with me. We saw Willie Nelson live twice, or I saw him twice this summer, and it's probably not a Golden Valley thing exactly, but it's definitely something that has been part of my life since I was a little kid.
Is country music big in Bemidji?
Country music is big everywhere outside of major metropolitan areas, and of course, big in the South too, in the big cities.
Well, I live a sheltered life here in the Wedge neighborhood. I don't admit this often, but I'm originally from Florida, so I guess I should know more about country music. I guess I lived in the south part of Florida though, so country music isn't that big there. Well,
if you'd like a tutorial, I'm more than happy to provide one.
Do you have any other?
I have a book idea. I'd like to write a book called The Political Philosophy of Country Music Outlaws and talk about how the outlaw country music of Johnny Cash, Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings really signaled a shift in American politics in the late 60s and 70s.
Oh, really? This is a real idea that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. Just need the time to write it.
Do you have any other fun facts about yourself before we go, besides the country music?
I have a dog. I'm a hockey dad. I spent a lot of time at hockey rinks. And when I was 12 years old, I was hit by a boat when I was riding my bike.
Hit by a boat?
Yes. I was riding my bike down a country road, and a pickup pulling a boat and trailer came up behind me, and the boat and trailer came off the back of the truck, and the boat and trailer hit me from behind.
Well, that's almost a way to connect with Wedge residents. You being threatened on your bike by a vehicle. So it probably wouldn't be a boat here in the Wedge, though.
It could be any manner of things, and anybody who is hurt on their bike, I will definitely have sympathy for, because that was a defining moment in my childhood.
Okay, well, thank you, Ryan Winkler, for coming on. Ryan Winkler is a candidate for Hennepin County Attorney. I'm your host, John Edwards. This has been the Wedge Live podcast. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.